Hello, this is Jeff Segor, and this is video number 8 in the series of the Programmer's Journal, building a website and server using Elasticsearch as the database, and our example is a recipe manager. So in this video, we're going to define some environment variables. There are some constants that we use throughout our program. They're better placed in the Windows 10 environment system variables, and I'll show how that's done. In the code itself, we're going to be making a change, and so instead of referencing this URL explicitly, which is essentially our landing URL for the application, we're going to be substituting in an environment variable called server_IP and ES port. So in this code here, this is going to be connecting to the Elasticsearch database. And then when we're actually running, adding our listener for the app itself, we're going to define a server port and an IP. And we're going to switch back. If this variable exists at the system level, then we won't use this, and similar here. If these were undefined, then we would default to the ngserve parameters. So to get at the modify the environment variables, the best way is to use this process. If you do it from the start and search for it, the lower window might be read-only. So if you do use the window X, and then Y will get you to the systems right here. So if I hit Y and then hit Advanced System Settings, I'm not going to do this here because I got some proprietary information in the environment variables. But if you click on here, then the windows will come up, and you modify the lower window to add your environment variables. And I assume most people know how to do that, where I'll look at this course. So once this is set up, these will be the definitions. There'll be a Elasticsearch user ID, which is Elastic. This would be the password that was given to us when we set up Elasticsearch. The port's going to be 9200 by default. And then we're going to have our special Angular side, basically our web side IP address. So we're going to have that as in our case here, 192.168.1.203, and then the port will be 98. And these will be accessible by the code. If this is done correctly, we can find out, we can look for this, see if we define them correctly by using the Windows 10 PowerShell. If you use the Windows X and then hit A for this PowerShell admin, say yes here, and then if we enter in this GCI env server, and the star here is basically is a wildcard, we'll see that we've got this defined correctly. And GCI env es, got the user ID is Elastic by default, and then this was the password that we were given, and then the port's going to be 9200 for Elasticsearch. So that's all set up correctly. Next thing we're going to do is, going back here, we're going to change the places, the code, set this up. So let's go back to our program. And there are 3 places where we're going to make some modifications to our code. When we brought this in, we hard-coded in this IP address. Instead, now that we're defining these as environment variables, we're going to go back to 4200 and the local host, which we won't be using because we'll be using this, and we called it server. The other place, which is actually accessing, on the server side, the code under server, under routes, we are referring to, we have to connect to the Elasticsearch database, which is using this IP, but at 9200. So instead of this hard-coded string, we're going to use what's called a templated string, which have these little backticks instead of the single quotes here. And then this construct here, the $, left and right brace, within here, this refers to a variable. So it's kind of a fancy way of templating strings. So this will pull it out of our environment variables. And we have to do the same thing for our input code as well. Okay, so now that that's done, also notice the same thing here. We had defined the user ID and the user key here. This is needed during the initialization of the Elasticsearch client on the server side. It needs this, and I think this should be set to true because we want to reject and we want to be able to use this particular certificate that's created by Elasticsearch. It's going to read it. And what we're going to do is I'm going to experiment with giving a bogus password and a bogus certificate and see what actually happens. And we're going to have a special page that will take care of any failures. So we're going to now construct some Angular components. So we're going to do that. Back to our So we're going to create 3 components. An Angular component can represent a page, going to a specific page, or a page could be made up of subcomponents. So in this case, we need a navigator, which will be sort of a header on the top of the page that will scan all the pages. And we can basically move the different pages there, sort of like a tab control. We're going to create a component so we can import data, and we're going to create a home page, which is going to be the landing page. And in each of these, I'm going to skip the tasks for now. So let's do that in the command line. So I just got into this. I've got to make sure I'm in the recipes folder. That's where Angular is. And we'll do this. G means generate. C is component. And we'll do the landing. Skip tests. So what that will do is it will create a folder called landing page, and each component has 3 elements. It's got the source code, it's got the HTML, what you see, and then the styling for that HTML. So we'll do the other 2. we got our import data, and then this other one. So right now we are seeing code, but basically when we bring up the blank, it doesn't have any direction to pull any of these components in. So we're going to have to go into this routing file here and define the routes and what the default routes are going to be. So that's going to look something like this. We're going to add, what this is going to do is anytime you type in that URL with our IP address and the port, it's going to by default go to the home component, which is landing, and we're going to define that path here, and we link this string which we put into the URL to this particular component. That's how you dynamically insert components into your web page. And this is done in the app routing module.ts, which is what we have right here. Another thing, before I do that, another thing that's important is we're going to add one more statement above this. Since we want our navigator to be on all the pages at the top, we're going to put this in here. So when we switch pages, they're going to insert at this location the specific page that we're going to, but it's also going to have this component at the top. So we're going to insert these statements in here. Now we have an error here, but there's a quick fix. If you click on this, it can find where this component is and put it into the import section right up here. Now, if this is correct, what will happen is if we launch the app and then go to this page and type in our URL, it should actually go to this component, and the component should display landing page works. So we're going into recipes, do a build. And then do our, so we had substituted our environment variables. That looks like that's working. We go and launch Chrome, and here we go. So we've got the navigator. We see that. We're going to put code in here, so the navigator will be up here, and this is our home page, so we see the landing page works. So both components now are in at the top level. And you'll notice that with that directive there, if I don't put the home address there, it automatically puts that in there. So that's our home page. Next step is to add in that navigator, the actual the code for that. And what we can do is we can steal that. So I switch over to my reference project. We've got a little bit of CSS code here. And this just adds a little color to that. And there is some code, not much code in here. So we'll replace. And by the way, if you want to automatically format as you put in here, the keys for that is Shift-Alt-F, and that basically does some formatting, more standard formatting. So we're actually going to have ability to, the way this works, we're using the unordered list, and we're going to have an href, which basically, when you click on this, will navigate to this name here. And since we defined landing in our routing, so this here knows to go to this particular component. So let's see what that looks like. Oops. So what actually happened here, we didn't actually compile correctly. So we had this error here, and it can't find the shopping list. But that's function that's defined here. So we'll add that in to our navigator, actually. Yeah, I didn't see that. Gotta make sure it compiles correctly. It did. We're still running. And there it works. So we basically got a landing page, which we haven't filled in yet, but we've now got our menus. Now I'm going to create a blue background, and then I'm going to change the color to these things as gold. But these things now you can actually click on, but they'll go nowhere, because we don't have. Go here. Don't actually have those components defined yet. So the way to do that, borrow some code. So remember that we have some global styles. We go into this directory styles. When we created Angular material, it automatically put in these statements. And what we can do here is add a background color for the entire app. And what's really cool about Visual Studio Code is if you put in, the actual identifier for the red, green, blue color and stuff, it actually has this little color panel that drops down. You can actually see what color it's going to be, which I think is really nifty. So now go back. Remember, since we're not using ng-serve, we need to recompile this each time. I can just use the up arrows here to do that. So I have to So I have to retype it. And now go back to our oh, where it is. It's not running. So let's run this. And so now we've got the menu items in here, and we've got this here. You can make one little change here in our CSS for the navigator. We can say, okay, we're going to change the nav item. I think it's a nav item. The class. And make the color gold. Let's see what that does. Does nothing. And that's because we actually want to say that this is going to be nav link. There we go. That's exactly what we want now. So what we're going to do in the next video is we're going to add this page for the import, put a couple buttons on there, and it's actually in the next video. We definitely will be accessing the database and storing in some predefined recipes.